When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All the Things Podcast. This episode is titled, What Junior Web Developers Need to Know About DevOps. So in this episode, Mike will be discussing a bit of an experience that he had at our old college, and it was the inspiration for this episode. I'll let him explain all the way through it, but basically the students there were asking some questions about, DevOps and how much you need to know and like why it's important and all kinds of things like that. So we're going to dive into those sort of questions and that sort of area of discussion. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And just a reminder that you can save 20% on Scrimba. Scrimba now has full stack courses as of recording this. You can go and check out some front-end courses, some back-end courses, and you can do so with their interactive media player code editor. I've coined that term myself. But you can get 20% off if you're a new account, if you make a new account on there. That's scrimba.com/links/HTML, all the things. That link, as well as the details surrounding the offer, will be on the show notes on HTMLallthethings.com. So, Mike, why don't you give us a little introduction into what you were up to last week?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this all came about from a little session that we had at my old college where we talked about what software engineering stuff is in demand currently so that the college can then go and update their courses to accommodate what the latest trends are in software engineering. And one of the questions that was brought up is what do these engineers, what do these junior engineers need to know about DevOps? DevOps is a huge subject, right? And these are software engineering students. They're not like IT people. They're not infrastructure. They're not computer engineering students. They're software engineering students. So it's a very directed question. And it kind of brought up some thoughts in my own head, and I gave my input on it. And I'll be giving that input here in this episode. And we have kind of a good back and forth there. But overall, what I want to do is I want to give you an outline from a high level, what you should be focusing on as a junior developer, as a web developer, when it comes to DevOps. And before we get into why DevOps matters, I want to outline what DevOps is from a high level as well. And I think the best way to outline that is this one kind of phrase that I've seen is what happens to your code after you push it, right? Like after you write your code, save it, push it to a branch, and push it, what happens to your code? There's many steps that can go on. One of those steps would be testing, right? It could be tested somewhere. Another one of those steps would be checking to make sure that your code is in a good shape to be put into production. Another step could be deploying it, right? So, and then another step could be doing the caching and all that. There's many steps that can run after you push your code. And every company, every project requires different steps. But all those steps really are what DevOps is, developer operations, right? It's not the writing of the code, it's the stuff that happens after you write your code and what helps you go from code to production website that's ready to go for any user. Or when you are doing a staging environment, like if you want to test something in a quote unquote production environment, then the DevOps would do something else, right? So you would have different pipelines, as we call them, for different actions and for different situations that you need to run your code through. Okay, so that's kind of like a big overview of what DevOps is. But what I want to do is I want to kind of outline, first of all, why DevOps matters, especially for people that are not DevOps engineers, because there's people that just do this, right? Like they just create these pipelines. And that's not really the same kind of knowledge as a web developer would have. So this is why the first thing that I would say is there is a blurred line between dev and ops today. Before, I think traditionally, a lot of times it was a very separated infrastructure. So like on a large team, it's probably still pretty separated, where you have an entire DevOps team of maybe like several engineers, and you have your web developers, and then they interface with meetings, and the DevOps team gives them like APIs to use or like a pipeline to just interact with, right? Nowadays, especially in smaller startups and smaller companies, or when you're working on your own projects, a lot of this DevOps stuff is intertwined into our operations, into web development, right? Like if you talk about stuff like Vercel, we'll talk about it in more detail later, but like that is a very much a DevOps as a service platform, right? It handles everything for you, but you're still interfacing with the DevOps side of things. So you're touching that line a little bit more as a web developer nowadays than you were before, in my opinion. And so it's important to understand what's going on in the background. It's important to be able to interface with it.
I actually want to quickly jump in here because I feel like anyone right now who's listening who is still learning the code part, the syntax part, and they're in that part of their coding journey, or even solo devs, solopreneurs, things like that, I feel as though they're going to be really confused as to what we're talking about still. So I'll just give an example. If you let's like compare what DevOps is to something that's a little more simple than DevOps, which is like building a website for a client. So let's just hypothetically say, you work for people at random, you're a freelancer, and someone contacts you, and they give you a bunch of like project parameters, and one of those project parameters is they want to be able to edit the site. So you go and set up the CMS for them to use, and you configure that CMS usually alongside them, where you're adding and removing fields and making things work well. Like you're adding limitations onto certain things, like maybe, oh, we need SEO fields, but we do want to limit the character count so that people aren't adding too many characters to our descriptions, things like that. You add all those parameters and you configure that CMS and get that CMS running and functioning for that client to use. In like the same breath, what is DevOps? Like, how does that relate to it? What it kind of is if you think about it, is think about you as a web developer right now. If you're like, I'm going to start web developing like today, and you decide to take on like a course on Udemy for JavaScript or whatever it is, and you start coding immediately. I mean, unless there's specifically like a GitHub section of your course right away, the chances are most of your code is just going to be local. Like you're going to be coding in an IDE, maybe Visual Studio Code, maybe whatever, but you're going to be working with files that are specifically on your computer. And what DevOps does is DevOps are the tools that you would need in a real world environment to complete your job. So for example, if whenever the GitHub updates, so let's just say you're like, hey, you know what? Like I need to have version control. That's a DevOps thing, where like version control is a tool that you use. Then you have like another step where it's like, hey, like every single time, a developer pushes to the GitHub, we need it to automatically like send out an email and go to a certain point in the company servers where the testers can see that a new build is there, and they can pull that new build down and they can do their testing. All of those things I just said, the version control, the piping over to the testing team, and the email, would all be stuff that's considered DevOps. They're tools that you would use, but you are the developer. You're not necessarily the person that is running those tools. The tools is the developer, the DevOps, the developer operations. So just like how you were, quote unquote, the pseudo DevOps for the client who said, I want to be able to edit my site, and you set up and configured and got that CMS running well for your client, the DevOps person, which is usually a server administrator to some extent, will be the person that does all these things. They are like the tools that are beyond you just coding. Because something like the IDE that you choose, that's all up to you. And what typically that's all up to you. How you manage your files, that's all up to you. Again, some of these things you may have to adhere to company structure, but the developer operations, it's like, okay, I finally finished coding up this slider. I finally finished coding up this login page. I finally finished coding this up. Now what? Oh, I need that portal. I need that GitHub portal. I need to be able to do this. I need to be able to do that. And just to give another quick example, when I was working in IT, we would have like really specific IT tools where you would log in, and it was in the intranet, and you would log in to specific URLs on that intranet, and that would help us manage tickets. It would help us pull down Windows builds that were approved by the corporation. It would allow us to, request things like, hey, I need a new hard drive. I have to go to the warehouse and, order that and things like that. those tools were created by someone on our team, but they weren't the IT person. They were the tech lead. And so the tech lead was kind of like our DevOps, our pseudo DevOps, where that person was creating these web pages, making sure everything was adhering to the right thing. They were managing the server where the Windows builds were sitting. So whenever we needed to install or reinstall Windows, we grabbed the right builds. And they would have like a really specific tool set for us. So our job as IT was to fix everything, fix the computers, fix the phones, route the wires, do all that. But whenever I go, hey, I'm done my ticket, I need to mark it as complete, and then I need to get another ticket, I would use that quote unquote DevOps tool to do that. I would log into that intranet portal. I would use that tool to check what the next ticket was and to mark mine complete. So it's kind of like the tools that surround your job. That's kind of like what DevOps is to a developer specifically.
It's a very good point. And I like the different kind of analogy that you're taking with it, that you're just interfacing with the tools, because that is very much the important distinction that I want to make in this episode, is that you're probably, I don't want to say this for everyone, not going to be writing those pipelines. You're not going to be writing those tools. So just learning how to interface them is the most important part. But why does it even matter? Like, why does DevOps matter? Why do you want to learn it before you get into work? Like, why do you need to know it? The first example that I want to point out is, those stories of like that junior developer that joins a team and takes down production? All of that comes from someone not understanding DevOps, not understanding the implications of what they're doing to the code base that would trigger a build that would take down production, or how they're impacting the pipeline, right? If you understand DevOps from a high level even, you can probably avoid 90% of the issues that would take down production, because not to, for instance, like this is just an example, but for instance, let's say that anytime you merge into a branch called main, it'll automatically start the production deployment process, and it'll automatically create production builds and put them up, right? Now, there's ways to prevent that from an infrastructure perspective, like not allowing merges to main, stuff like that. But there's always ways around them. There's always mistakes made in both the setup and the development process. So if you accidentally push to main on your first day as a junior developer, and you've pushed in some bad code, that could trigger the builds and take down production. That's one example of a bad situation happening from someone that doesn't understand how DevOps works. But if you took the time to understand, like, hey, change management, Git, if I push to main, bad stuff will happen. So I'll make sure to create a branch and just work on that branch, right? That's one way to prevent bad things from happening, okay? There's many, many different examples that you can go down. We'll cover a couple of them down in this episode, but this is the stuff that I'm talking about. If you know it, there's less chance of you being that person that takes down production in the first day, right? Some more examples of why you need to know DevOps. It'll make you a better teammate, right? Like, by understanding where your code goes after you push it, it'll make you better, because again, you're going to prevent those mistakes that I was talking about just now. You're also going to know how, kind of like, what questions to ask about, like, what the production pipeline is, what the staging pipeline is. Even knowing those terms is going to make it easier for your team to get you spun up and get you onboarded onto their systems much faster. Whereas if you go in blind and not understand what pipelines are, for instance, which is, again, pipeline, I'll define it a little bit. A pipeline is the process of getting something pushed to a environment, right? Like, it could be a production pipeline, it could be a staging pipeline. It's a set of steps that a DevOps engineer would have coded, right, in a script or in a service like Jenkins or something like that, that would take your code and get it to a point where it's deployed to a certain environment. Okay, so there's different pipelines for different things, but if you understand what a pipeline is from a high level, that's going to help you. What it'll also help you do is troubleshoot issues faster, right? Like, let's say you get to a couple weeks in and you push something to a staging environment, something goes down. Well, if you don't know the pipeline, if you don't know the developer operations ecosystem, how are you going to know where the logs are? That's kind of where the logs live, is somewhere inside of that DevOps cloud. So if you understand that, hey, logs have to live there, you don't have to understand exactly where they are. I want to be clear here. Every job will have a different way of displaying the logs, a different way of, or a different service that does the logging, shows the logs. But if you know that, hey, it's going to be in the pipeline, it's going to be wherever we're deploying, that's a way you can go in and ask the team, being like, hey, where are the logs for this, deployment, right? That is much easier than being like, something's wrong, I don't know how to fix it. Those are the kinds of general terms that you would say if you didn't understand developer operations pipelines, right? Like you would just not even know what to ask.
Knowing what to ask and knowing who to ask, especially at a larger corporation, is like really critical because I mean, I don't know if you experience this, Mike, but like having worked in a place, if you ask the wrong person, sometimes you'll get like just no answer. But oftentimes you'll kind of get like a disgruntled, like, I don't do that. Right. I don't do that. Why are you calling me? Why are you bugging me? Why is your team always calling me? Like you kind of get those answers sometimes. And you want to know like who to ask, and you want to know like how to ask like an intelligent question as well. Like think about a team that works asynchronously. If you're having an issue and pinging someone who may not be online at that exact time due to the fact they're asynchronous, if you just say like, hey, now it's like the next day they reply with hello, you know what I mean? And then the next day you reply, how many days goes by when you're solving a thing? But if you know, oh, this something weird's happening, like I'm pushing to like get, and it, the ticket isn't opening for the testers. You know exactly who to ask, you know exactly what part of the pipeline is breaking, and you can write all that in the initial message. Like, oh, like if I'm the DevOps guy, you can go like, hey Matt, like I'm noticing that this is not working. Why is that? So now when I get back to my desk, I see that Slack message and I can immediately start working on the issue. I can immediately go look. It's not just this weird like, hey, how's it going? Good. We're 4 days in. Like, you're able to be that better team member that Mike was talking about.
That's exactly it. Yep. So the next topic that I want to talk about in this, and I think this is one big point that I made during that meeting that I was talking about with the developing team that's creating the courses for the college that we're in, is learning change management, like GitHub, Git in general, is your way of understanding DevOps from a software development perspective, right? A lot of the current, the new DevOps environments, and even older ones, to be fair, are going to be powered by the version control system, right? Like by Git. So anytime, I made this example a couple of times already, anytime you do a merge into a branch called staging or a branch called dev or whatever, it's going to kick off a set of actions inside the developer operations pipeline that will then deploy that environment to the preview environment or the staging environment, whatever you want to call it, right? If you don't understand Git, you don't understand the implications of what you could be doing. So back to that example of taking down production, you push to the wrong branch that's connected to production. Again, this shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it does. You push the wrong branch, it takes down production. So these are the consequences of not understanding Git. And to their credit, the software development program now teaches Git from first year. Now, that wasn't the case when we were in college, for sure. I don't think we learned about Git for the entire time. Maybe we had like a lesson on it or something. I don't remember talking about Git at all. I learned that later on in life. It's starting to be taught earlier.
I remember Git partially from my co-op because I remember us talking about setting up a local Git server, just kind of like chatting about it. And then I also remember we did have like a brief lesson in it in our embedded course, but because we were all like solo coders, it didn't matter. It was just sort of like, hey, once you're done your code, you have to submit it for marks, and you submit that to the college like handing in system. So it's not like I'm Git pushing and then the teacher has access to my Git and then checks it. It's like a proprietary college system.
And that's how it should be. Like what you just mentioned, it should be that the professors have access to your GitHub accounts. Probably like you create a college GitHub account under your organization, and then the professor just sees all your assignments in Git. All the grading is done in Git through like pull requests, comments, and like when you're teaching Git, you should treat it as your entire platform for coding for your entire class. Right? Like Git should be part of the system rather than just something you teach on the side and then forget about. And that's how we were taught, like Matt said. Like we just had no reason to use it because it's another overhead that we had to learn, and no one was grading us on it. No one was caring if we submitted it. We weren't even allowed to submit a GitHub like link or anything like that. We had to, like Matt said, submit the file directly into the college's system. So I think it's evolving. From what I'm seeing, at least in our college, there's probably other colleges that are taking it into account. the reason that I think it's a good thing is that it's not really a hard system to learn, especially the basics of it. A lot of, IDEs like VS Code provide really good graphical user interfaces that help you do anything you want in Git without having to even touch the CLI now. And knowing it, again, gives you that understanding of change management on a whole grander scale to allow you to have a kind of a head up on the DevOps side of things, right? Like if you understand how merges work, if you understand how different branches are kind of treated differently, depending on how you configure them, it gives you a head up, because then you can ask the smarter questions when you're get the job. Even like, what branch is tied to production? Like that question itself, it seems so simple. And probably from people listening to this that have been in been software developers at jobs, that seems like a no-brainer. But coming out of college or coming from a junior developer self-taught perspective, that is not a question you would ask. You don't know what it is. Like, what do you mean branch is tied to a, production? Like, what is that? It's gobbledygook. But once you start understanding change management and start understanding how it integrates into the DevOps systems, that gives you a huge advantage in that perspective, right? And also Git in general, like change management in general, is really, really good thing to know, because any change you make can always be easily reverted. And one of the biggest things that I want to also get clear in the DevOps side of things is reverting. For instance, let's say you do push something bad to main and a production build is deployed. Git allows you to revert that change in one step, right? Like there's a git revert command, or you could do it in a commit, like you go back to an old commit. There's many different ways of handling that, but there are ways of handling it. And if you know that off the get-go, even if you were to take down production, you can bring it back up really easily, right? So knowing how to revert something is one of the most important aspects of DevOps. Like when you're creating, like when you're deploying a production build, a lot of times when we're deploying a production build in our systems at the company that I'm working on right now, one of the first things I ask is, do we have a backup plan for reverting? Because if we have a backup plan for reverting, I don't really care. Like, okay, we can do all the checks and all that. That's great. But as long as we can revert, we can deploy it and, make sure that everything's okay. If everything breaks, we can revert it. There's no real risk. There's no high risk. As soon as you have a system, and sometimes you have these situations where reverting becomes really complicated, that's when you have to have like a million different checks. And that's when you have to go through a much more rigorous process. But the ability to revert a change is a super, super key concept in DevOps. And it makes it so that you can actually build quickly, like, do production deployments quickly without having to have 15 different sign-offs and slowing down your entire pipeline, and still have that like ability to make mistakes. And it's okay.
I mean, the ability to like make mistakes and revert is like so critical, even for I guess it would be I don't know what I was going to say, morale, but maybe just the mindset of the daily coding as well. Because I mean, we would have it, and well, we've discussed this at length, so I'm not going to kind of go into it, but we've had it where, we go to college and we had like lab tests, and it's like something stupid happens, like, one of our chips burns out, not due to misconfiguration, just they're cheap chips. They're like $4 a piece. Sometimes they burn out, sometimes they're broken, sometimes they're faulty. And then it's just like, well, you get 0 now, there goes 20%. And it's like, there's such a high stake, for stuff like that. But it's like in real life, it's like, do you want to have that constant like looming over you, right? Like if you make a mistake, it's like, oh shoot, I should just be able to revert it. That makes total sense. Like something like a Webflow, for example, they have a backup system. You can like tell it like, yo, make me a backup right now, label it, whatever, like, before changing slider, you do it and you're like, holy cripe, this slider is a disaster. You just revert back. You just go back. You can even like preview previous builds as well, previous backups as well. And so if you're like, oh shoot, like I know that I needed an ID for this code to work, like what was the ID? I can like go and look at the old version, like within the Webflow designer, and like check the ID. Like that, just that the idea of that being there takes like so much of the stakes off of your plate, because you're just like, I'm not worried now about if I make a mistake, or if something just goes wrong. Like it doesn't even need to be a mistake, and it takes so much off your shoulders, and then allows you also to, well, not only to be less stressed, more agile as well, but it also allows, I would say, for a better environment for beginners to try things. Like you're going to have more as a team, you're going to have more confidence in saying, okay, the beginner's going to push their first thing, everybody ready to revert just in case, and not like, well, let's hope the beginner doesn't F this one up. Like that's both of those situations are the same, but also very different.
That is exactly it. And that's the environment you want set up. Now, having said that, every developer DevOps system is different. So you can go into a really old legacy company or even a new legacy company that's just set up in a janky way, or a new company that's set up in a janky way, not a new legacy company. That's a contradiction. But you can go there and they could be set up in a way that it's hard to revert, or the DevOps system is really manual or whatever. Like, so this is why another thing that I pushed was like, you can't teach a single DevOps system. Like the professors were like, well, what system should we teach? Should we teach them like how to do a Jenkins pipeline or something like that? And I'm like, you can, but like when they go to like work, it's going to be, even if it is Jenkins, completely different setup of Jenkins. So what's the point? Like, why teach them some deep understanding of this tool when in reality, they're going to just have to be interfaced with it. And second of all, it's going to be set up in a completely different way than they would set it up. And so now it's like, you're questioning your own sanity in that case. So again, it's better to understand that these tools exist, and then you can ask those questions. Again, when you join a company, a smart question to ask is, how do I revert a change, or how do I revert a build if I push something bad? If I accidentally take down production, how do I revert it? And if you ask that question, the people will already know, like the company will already know that you understand developer operations pipelines. That's just one obvious indicator that you are aware of this, that you've used it before, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to put you ahead.
And honestly, that this is like a good indicator for the other side of the coin too, meaning the companies themselves. This is a good indication that if students are going to start getting educated this way from colleges, we're already seeing one, as we said, then those questions are going to come at you every single time, or virtually every single time you have a new hire. That's not going to be something where, you know, companies are going to kind of roll their eyes logistically and be like, great, now I'm going to have all these questions to ask or answer. I mean, at that point, you as the company owner, or maybe the documentation person, needs to start saying, all right, we need to have documentation set up in some way where developers that are being onboarded can ask those questions, and can ask the question of, hey, like, how do I revert? Where do I push things? Is there like, you know, an absolutely no stakes playground where if it goes down, you know, who cares kind of thing? How does all this work? And having good documentation is going to save you from having to answer that question beyond saying, oh yeah, you know, we have all the answers to those type of questions. Here's a link to our wiki, our internal wiki, you know, have at it. And then that way you're not answering the question over and over again, and you're prepared, but also you're preparing your actual developers as well. You're onboarding your junior or your new developers.
Yep, that's exactly it. Okay, so with Git out of the way, kind of if you understand the basics of Git and you get a little bit understanding of how Git connects to your pipelines, it's really important. The next steps for me would be start interfacing with developer operation systems, right? Now, key here, and I said this a couple of times already, I'll reiterate it. You don't need to build the pipeline. That's not what junior developers should be doing at a company. Like they should, if you're a web developer that's hired at a company and they're like, hey, recreate our production pipeline, that's a red flag. That is a red flag. That's not a junior developer, a junior web developer's role in specifically, okay? But you need to know how to use the pipeline. So you need to know things like how to trigger builds. Now, a lot of times, again, like I said, that's merging to a specific branch. Sometimes that is a more manual process of going to whatever pipeline, Jenkins, something, and clicking a button, right? Like you need to know how to trigger builds. Now, do you need to know how to trigger every single possible build off the bat before you join a company? No, but you need to understand the process, that there is some process involved in triggering builds. Again, it's a question you can ask. It's documentation you can read when you join a company. You need to be able to check build logs and understand them to a certain degree. So when a product builds, what will happen is during the build process, there will be logs that come out of the server where it's being built. And there is a ton of errors that can come there. Wrong environment files, your database connection is broken, your package isn't correct. Like there's a package mismatch because you pushed in the wrong lock file for your npm. A bunch of different things can go wrong during a build that would fail a build. Now, a lot of times that's not a big deal because these DevOps systems have a auto revert or a kind of a system in place where the current production version doesn't get swapped until a fully non-errored build is complete. And so like when something fails, you don't take down production, you just look at the logs, you try again, Again, a lot of these newer systems, a lot of the better, more robust developer operations pipelines will have that in it. But asking that is probably a good idea, is being like, hey, what happens if a build fails? Right? Like, does that mean that production is down? Does that mean I have to revert a bit? Like, what happens? What's the procedure there? Or is it just like it fails, I rebuild, no big deal? Totally a valid question. And again, we'll show that you understand the process. And one of the big things here is also reverting a really bad deploy, right? Or a bad deployment. So you sometimes you can get through a build, everything is fine. That's perfect, like, during the build process, but the code that you're actually putting on the server is wrong. So like you missed you missed a variable and it's breaking at runtime. With web development, especially because we're like web development is a runtime language, there's no like compile step. Therefore, stuff can break in production quite often. And so you need to understand how to revert a bad deployment. And I've mentioned that a couple times already. A lot of times that'll be just reverting a commit. Sometimes systems have a revert button right in the place. Sometimes you have to revert a deployment with a couple different steps. But again, understanding that procedure is a really important step before you can kind of hit that production deployment button for sure. Next thing here is, what are the tools that you should kind of be aware of in terms of developer operations as a junior developer? Now, there's going to be more, but these are the ones that I think are good to know in different capacities. I think Vercel and Netlify are good tools to learn how to interface with DevOps without having to set up your own pipeline. Because Vercel and Netlify are your entire pipeline. They just connect to your GitHub, and then as long as you understand change management, like I was saying a couple sections ago, you'll essentially be able to deploy a production application or a staging environment straight through the Git command line and have it all automatically show up on the web, right? But there's a lot of steps in there that you can take, like for instance, the build tool, the build logs, that's directly available in the Vercel dashboard. So you can, as the build is going, you can monitor that build and see what's actually happening in the build logs. And that's super cool to see. And again, if anything goes wrong, reading that build log, understanding what's wrong, redeploying, all of that is super important to understand. That's interfacing, right? Like you're interfacing with the DevOps systems without having to create them. So I think Vercel and Netlify are a really good baseline to start at least interfacing with it, right? That's your first step into DevOps and understanding how to use it. The next step I would do is understand a little bit of GitHub Actions, right? GitHub Actions are a more custom approach where you can create your own, like there's a YAML files that you can create, which is just essentially like structured data where you can set GitHub Actions to do certain steps for you. Some of those steps are directly integrated into like hosting providers like DigitalOcean or AWS, and they can literally deploy stuff. Now, this is more custom. I wouldn't go too deep into like deploying an entire production application to it, but a lot of times what GitHub Actions allow you to do is run automated testing, right? Like it'll set up like a little server for you, set up your code on that server, test it, and then spin down the server. There's a lot of patterns you can follow for that, and that's a good first step into GitHub Actions, setting them up without having to do the entire pipeline for a production deployment. Jenkins is another one. So this one, I wouldn't say you have to know it or set something up in Jenkins. This is just something to be aware of. Jenkins is a much more customizable piece of software that creates these pipelines. You can do anything you could possibly think of in Jenkins, and a lot of older legacy software and enterprise setups will still use Jenkins. And so understanding what it is, maybe looking at a few dashboards online, taking a little watching a little tutorial on YouTube just to wrap your head around what it is and understand the verbiage that's inside of it will help you get that step up if your company does use Jenkins, right? Once you're using Jenkins, a lot of it does come back to being like, how was it set up? How are you triggering builds? It's completely customizable, so it can be in infinite different ways. It could be through GitHub, through change management. It could be through just a button on a dashboard somewhere. It could be through a webhook. There's a million different ways you can set up to do builds on Jenkins. So knowing one way isn't enough to the degree that you could like say that you know Jenkins. That's why just being aware that Jenkins is super customizable will give you that approach to ask the right questions when you're onboarding, right? That's really what we're getting to. And the last one here, and this is kind of like, again, a more customizable one, but has a little bit more hand-holding for you, is something like Circle CI or Travis CI. CI stands for continuous integration, which is a part of DevOps. That's the whole like check into Git, have something happen automatically. That's part of continuous integration. So this sets up like more, not as much as Vercel or Netlify, but like more than GitHub Actions and Jenkins for you. So it does some of the steps in an automated way and allows you to do some other customization. It's really a PaaS, a product as a service or something like that. What is it? I can't remember what P stands for, but it's like it's a service that is available. You have to pay for it a lot of times unless you're on the hobbyist plan, but it allows you to set up a pipeline really quickly, really easily. That's fairly customizable, but not as like locked in as something like Vercel.
I have a question about this. So like you kind of mentioned this a little bit when you were talking about GitHub Actions, but you earlier in the episode, you also mentioned, you don't need to build the pipeline. You should know how to use it. But just having you describe all these things like from Vercel through Travis CI and all the rest of it, GitHub Actions, Jenkins, it kind of sounds like this is something where people could absolutely read up on it to learn about it, but then you're not really going to get the full picture until you start playing with it. And the issue is that when you go into a company, they're probably not going to want you to play with it, if that makes sense. You're going to have to use it in a professional way. You can't just be going in and playing with it. So like, what would you say to that angle? Like, how far should people be going? Is it really like, hey, go and do some studying, like read some theory, read some docs, or maybe watch some YouTube videos or something and get acclimated? And then after that, really the in-person, I guess, usage and training should be, or the real world, I suppose, in-person and training should be done quite literally in the real world, like at the company that hires you? Or do you think that people should actually kind of play with building the pipeline? Because like in a way, it's like you're building a pipeline, but you're not building like a real one. So it's not like you're gonna, high stakes, like I just built this pipeline and now like Amazon's down. It's a scaffold for you to learn. Really. So like how far should people take this?
So this is like, it depends on how much time you have and what you want to focus on. I just think there's so many other more important things to focus on that I think building the pipeline is just not valuable enough. And for instance, Vercel and Netlify, that's something you should be hands-on with. That's something that you should try to deploy with, screw up, screw around, that, because again, that pipeline is already built for you and you're just interacting with it in a structured way. And really, if you understand that interaction, whether like it is a really good, smooth experience, but if you understand that interaction, you can extrapolate that knowledge into any of these other pipelines, because they're going to be, created in a slightly different way, but the actual like knowledge of like, hey, where's a deployment run, understanding that question and where to ask it or where to look for it in the docs is going to be solved inside of the Netlify experience for you, because you'll be like, oh, in Netlify, there was a deployments tab where I can see the deployments, I can click into them and see the logs. So like I was able to see the logs. So like now you're going to know like, okay, where are these build logs? You're going to know that question. And when you get into the job, you're going to ask that question, because again, you're not going to have to create these pipelines. So creating them manually in a low stakes environment isn't really going to give you that much anyway. You're going to create a really simple pipeline. It's going to, you're going to understand that, but like, what does that really give you? Whereas like building an application and then putting it in a pipeline and then using that pipeline that's already created for you, that's, in my opinion, enough for you to be able to interface with any other pipeline that comes at you. Now, again, different pipelines are completely different. And that's one of the reasons that I don't think creating a pipeline is that important. And you might have a really good experience with a Vercel, and you might have a terrible experience pipeline with X company, but that's at least you have a baseline, and at least you have somewhere to start from. And then in the other company, you could be like, well, Vercel had this, like, how do I do this? They'll explain it to you, or they'll be like, we can't do that in this pipeline. It's just, we don't have it built in. And then you can figure out workarounds. So again, having that baseline, in my opinion, is enough when you're getting like a junior developer role. As you go up in levels, as you start working at companies and start experiencing these different things, it changes a little bit. Like, I think, as you start getting experience and understanding how to write a GitHub action script, Like a YAML file is a pretty important aspect of a job because you might have to do, again, the automated testing approach. There's plenty of other things that a GitHub action pipeline might help you with, not just testing. That just having that skill might be a good skill. But if you're sticking with web development, will you ever really need to know Jenkins, like how to build an entire Jenkins pipeline? Probably not. So why learn it as a junior developer? That's kind of where I'm at with it.
So it kind of sounds like you don't want to go like super deep into this. Like this isn't something that you want to like spend all your time, because I feel like if you went and tried to learn, like you listed 4 or 5 things there, if you went and tried to learn all 4 or 5, I mean that's a whole other thing on top of the fact that you're still trying to learn, especially at the junior developer level. You're still trying to learn the actual code part, let alone, you know, like interacting with any other like third-party API and stuff like that, plus all the other company policies and stuff that you're going to have to adhere to when you get employed inside a place. So like this is like it's like
it's too much.
Dig too deep. Like it don't.
Yeah, I'd rather you spend a little bit more time on Git versus, you know, fiddling around with the Jenkins pipeline for sure.
Yeah, right. Because like I mean, at this point, then you're like, I mean, depending on how complex you make your own, I guess, test pipeline, you're kind of dabbling into server administration, and then it's like really you're kind of dabbling into IT at that point a little bit. So then it's like, man, now you're really crossing over, and that's another. Not only another discussion, but it's also another profession.
That's correct. Okay, next thing here is monitoring and awareness. So a lot of pipelines have this kind of built in, like I said, with logging. So I mentioned at the start of the episode, what is DevOps? It's what happens to your code after it gets into production, or after you push it into a branch, or after you write it, right? Part of that is obviously checking to make sure your code is running okay on a consistent basis. So that will have with it logging. So you might use different services for logging. You might have a way to look at logs. Again, if you go to the Vercel route, they have their own logging metrics. Like you can look at logs for any deployment, both the build logs, which is what I mentioned before, but there's also runtime logs. So if someone were to hit an error, like especially on the server side, it'll appear in those logs, okay? And there's different levels that you can enable. Like you can have it so that you have like a service that monitors literally the client side logs. As we know with web development, a lot of the code is run client side on a user's browser. That log will never actually appear inside of your DevOps logs because that's server oriented. But if you want, you can send it there with different services like Sentry.io or Datadog or PostHog. There's plenty of different services that you can look at. But just knowing that these things exist, again, if you just look at Vercel a little bit, that's probably enough for you to understand what's going on in the logging perspective. You don't have to go dive deep into it, but monitoring and awareness is part of DevOps. It's part of that DevOps team. If there is a DevOps team, they will be the ones that set up like Slack notifications if a server is down, et cetera, et cetera. That's the kind of stuff that DevOps handles. How to report and escalate incidents properly, right? Like if you see an incident happening, what's the procedure in your company to escalate that incident? Like who do you have to talk to? Knowing that process in a company and knowing that there is a process for that in general will get you to respond really quickly. And again, it's one of those things that just make you a better team member, right? Like if you're able to properly escalate issues and to the right people at the right time, then they could fix them quicker, and therefore your application will be fixed and in a better state. That's going to be a kudos for you because you were able to do that, right? If you don't understand what DevOps is at all, and you don't even know where to look, and you don't know who to ask, and you start asking random people in the company, that's going to slow things down, not going to look great.
I will say something there too. Companies that don't have a proper report and escalate incidents procedure, as well as reporting, like the reporting procedure, as well as a procedure to handle the incidents themselves, are usually a total and utter actual disaster when something goes wrong. People are panicking, like full panic. I've seen people like run around like crazy. People are swearing and hollering at each other. It's like total and utter chaos because no one knows what's going on. No one knows who's accountable for what. No one knows who's going to get in trouble. If there's an accountability string, like an actual and like an unmitigated disaster. So like not only is it important for you to learn how to report and escalate incidents properly, but if the company you're working for does not have a process surrounding this at all, not just the reporting again, but the actual incident handling, if there's no process, I would seriously try to advocate for that within the parameters of your job. Like, don't be like attacking the CEO or something, but like, like, bring it up in whatever meetings you're allowed to within like the scope of your job and be like, hey, remember the last 3 times when like everyone was panicking and no one pulled logs because no one knew what the heck was going on, and then these people are like, somebody's screaming and hollering, and then the one person that's really good at their job, they disappear for an hour because they're trying to solve the issue, but they're not communicating with anybody, and no one knows what's happening, and you see how it's going to snowball again, and then now it's going to happen, and then that person was in the middle of a fix, but the other person went in and they tried to fix something else, and now there's 2 things that are broken, and then the rant continues, and I've seen this live, so don't do that.
That is very true. And on it, like, war rooms, which is what should happen in these situations that Matt is describing, are a skill on its own and not something a junior developer can really learn until they actually experience it. But I do want to have an episode on war rooms at some point. I've said that a couple times, I think, during the podcast. It's something that I've done many, many times now. Like, I've had like probably over a dozen, maybe 24 war rooms that I've been a part of and led. So definitely something to stay tuned for. I will have an episode on that, how to coordinate one, the disaster situations, stuff like. There's plenty of stories that I can tell as well. Other than that, that's kind of like the monitoring or awareness section. I kind of want to move on straight into the good habits to start early, right? Like, these are this kind of recommendation I have for you. I've already said a few of them, but first one here is writing commit messages that matter. So being, again, back to that change management, like how to do proper change management, understanding how to write a good commit will help with any sort of situation that can arise, because how it works is if you need to revert to something, if you don't understand what that revert is, like what that commit was that you need to revert to, if it's not written properly, it's going to be harder to find, right? And when you're trying to debug something and you're looking at the Git history and the Git blame, it's just way easier to understand what you were trying to do and then seeing where the bug could have come in if you have proper commit structure. Now, every company will have a little bit different, but knowing how the company wants you to write the commit messages and following that template is an important part of being a good team player, or being a good developer, and kind of stepping into DevOps a little bit there. Testing before you have a push to production, or even before a push to staging. An idea would be like, if you have a script, a package script that can just run a test, like an npm run test locally, then do that locally before you push to production that would run like CI testing, like continuous integration testing. I was mentioning testing a little bit before, but testing can be very, very varied. Sometimes you push into a branch in different companies that could kick off a set of integration tests that could take hours. So if you just haphazardly push to a branch without thinking about testing locally, and you need to push like 15 times just to fix the tests running, that could be a day or 2 of work. So if you can run those tests locally before you push to production and they run a lot faster, then you could save some of that time. You could save some money, because testing inside of a pipeline usually costs money because of server time, et cetera, is just a better way to handle testing. Keep your teammates informed in Slack or on a project board. So Matt kind of mentioned this before with like people just disappearing for an hour. When something happens in DevOps, that's when communication is the most important. Like when something goes down, when something is about to be deployed, et cetera, that's when you need to communicate more than any time else in your in your team environment. So being good at communicating, being good at updating teams, being like, hey, I'm about to push, even if you're first starting out, hey, I'm about to push to the staging environment. Saying that is perfectly okay, because then someone can come in and is like, hey, I'm actually pushing that staging environment too. Can we wait a little bit, merge our changes in together? You can avoid some merge conflicts. You can avoid situations, and just being on the ball and understand what you're supposed to understand how the pipeline is supposed to work while you're talking to your teammates is going to help you for sure. Understanding environment-specific issues, like if there's specific environments for dev, staging, and prod, maybe there's different ways to test in each one of those environments. Maybe there's different like credentials you have to push to each one of those environments because you have different user accounts there, stuff like that. You test a feature in staging and it doesn't work, but it works fine locally. Turns out the API URL was hard-coded for dev. Like there's different environment variables that you might have to set as you're testing and staging environments. Like understanding environment-specific, just understanding environments. Let me generalize it. Understanding that there are different environments and what that entails is going to give you a step up. It's going to be a good habit to learn early on. Like if you're first starting out, and again, go back to the Vercel example, Vercel is a good interface for that. Vercel any deployment that you do or any branch that you create will automatically create staging deployments. But if you want them to not point to production, like URLs or something like that, or production API keys, you have to go into the environment variables in Vercel and set different environment variables for different environments. So there's a production environment, development environment, staging environment. You could set different environment variables there. If you understand that concept, that's going to give you a heads up or a step up. And that's really it for the good habits. I think takeaways in general, to kind of wrap this up a little bit, is you don't need to be a DevOps expert. Knowing how to work with DevOps will make you a lot more effective. The best junior devs are definitely curious. So that's why I was saying, like, knowing how to ask these things is a really, really good step. So ask how things are wired up. If you already know how DevOps works in general, asking those questions is going to be a lot easier for you, right? And don't be afraid of failure. So the first thing you need to do to not be afraid of failure is understanding how to revert a failure, right? As soon as you understand that, hey, even if I take something down, I can revert and it's back up in a minute or two, or 5 minutes, whatever, then that fear starts to go away. Matt mentioned it right away when I said that, but that's a real thing. And as soon as that fear goes away, then the ability to ship faster and ship better is going to come back. If you lock yourself into this, like, if I push something, it might break everything, then you're going to be trying to check for perfection everywhere. You're going to slow yourself down by 50%, 100%. Like, you're going to slow yourself down a lot. So having that ability to fail and then revert is a really, really important concept to take away from this.
The only thing I have to maybe add is just that last point there, where like being able to fail and like move in a bit of a quicker, more agile way is like really crucial for companies that are not old hat, like that aren't legacy companies, that aren't older code bases. Because if you're working in a startup, that's basically what I'm boiling this down to, then they're going to want things done quickly, especially if you're working for a marketing team. Sometimes it's like something where it's like, hey, we need this changed like right away. Because even though it's something as simple as like, hey, the promo code was published with a typo, that can cause like a bunch of like human disasters where people are trying to use a promo code that isn't working and no one knows what the heck's going on. And then someone will be like, oh, don't worry about it, we'll just like add a new promo code that has the typo, but then you didn't know that. And then so like being able to like revert, change, and like, again, like, well, as Mike already mentioned, having really good communication during issues like that is going to be, paramount to success.
100%. And I think that honestly wraps up the DevOps episode. Hopefully, again, you learned enough to get started, to get your foot in the door. It's definitely not enough, it's definitely not enough to listen to this episode. I would highly recommend trying it out. Vercel is a really good first step, in my opinion, and then moving forward as you go.
Absolutely. And I think that's all I have to add as well. So let's run the old conclusion. Remember, if you want to support episodes like this, you can do so on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons: Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Bosteler from the website swoonworthydesigns.com. We'd also like to give a shout out to Michael Araka, a contributing author on HTMLallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaught.txg.com. And just a reminder, you can get 20% off of a new Scrimba account if you go and check out our affiliate link. Affiliate link will be in the show notes on HTMLallthethings.com, as well as all the details surrounding that affiliate link with the offer as well. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on. And this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.